Genesis begins with the breath of life in this perfect sprawling garden, right?
Right.
And then it ends 50 chapters later with a dead man in a wooden box in Egypt.
Quite the contrast.
It really is. Welcome to Reformed Thinking. We are setting up this discussion specifically for you, the listener, who wants to gather extensive, thorough knowledge without, feeling buried under a mountain of academic terminology.
Yeah, we want to keep it accessible.
Absolutely. Today, we are analyzing a very specific, highly concentrated piece of ancient literature. We have a stack of sources in front of us.
The very dense stack, I might add.
Very dense, yeah. Specifically, two intense, highly detailed theological commentaries that focus entirely on a mere 5 verses.
Just 5 verses?
Genesis 50, verses 22 through 26. And our mission today for this deep dive is to uncover a massive literary and theological contrast.
Which is really the core of the whole book's conclusion.
Right. We are looking at why the massive, sprawling book of Genesis does not end with a grand climax, nor with a triumph, but with an unburied coffin in a foreign land.
It's a cliffhanger, really.
It is. And we are going to see how this specific, peculiar funeral arrangement functions as an absolute masterclass in covenant theology. Okay, let's unpack this. The visual contrast alone is staggering.
Oh, absolutely staggering.
We go from the tree of life in Eden to a dead man in a wooden box in Egypt.
Yeah, and the author constructs that with absolute intentionality. It's not an accident.
Not at all.
The author of Genesis forces the reader to sit in this state of unresolved tension, but to grasp the gravity of those final 5 verses, we need to establish the precise historical setting.
Okay, set the scene for us.
So we are looking at the year 1806 BC.
Wow, long time ago.
A very long time ago. And the location is the fertile delta region of Goshen in Egypt.
Right, where the Israelites settled.
Spot on. Now, at this moment in the narrative, Joseph has survived betrayal, slavery, false imprisonment.
A catastrophic global famine.
Yeah, all of that. And now he is 110 years old.
Which, is a long life by any standard.
It is. But in the context of the Egyptian Middle Kingdom, living to be 110 was not just an arbitrary biological milestone.
What do you mean?
It was considered the absolute ideal. To the Egyptian mind, a life of 110 years was the mark of a fully blessed existence.
Oh, wow. So it had a specific cultural weight.
Very much so. It signaled that the gods had shown maximum favor upon a person.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, you find this number repeatedly in ancient Egyptian wisdom literature. Whenever they described a life lived to its absolute fullest potential, the number they used was 110.
So, to the surrounding culture, Joseph has achieved the absolute pinnacle of human success.
Without a doubt.
He is the Grand Vizier, second only to Pharaoh. He has lived to this ideal age. He possesses wealth, status, supreme authority.
He's got it all.
Everything about his situation screams that he has won the game of life. He is essentially the most successful man in the hemisphere.
Yeah, in their eyes, he's basically touched by the divine.
But then we look at the Egyptian view of death, and the picture gets incredibly tense.
Very tense. Because the Egyptian view of death during the Middle Kingdom was entirely dominated by the mortuary cult of Osiris.
Right, the god of the afterlife.
Yes. And for the Egyptians, the afterlife was not some ethereal spiritual existence disconnected from the physical world.
Like floating on clouds or something.
No, not at all. It was intensely physical and territorially bound. They spent vast fortunes ensuring safe passage into the afterlife.
Which is why we have the pyramids and mummies, right?
Precisely. Primarily through the meticulous process of mummification and the construction of massive rock-cut tombs and mastabas.
They were obsessed with it.
Utterly obsessed. The preservation of the physical body was an ontological necessity for pagan eternity.
Meaning, if the body is gone, you're gone.
Yeah, if the physical body decayed, the soul would cease to exist in the afterlife. They believed the soul had different parts, like the ka and the ba.
The ka and the ba, okay.
And those parts needed a preserved physical form to return to. Furthermore, their theology was bound to the specific geography of the Nile River.
So it's very localized.
Very. To be buried outside of the fertile Nile Valley was viewed by native Egyptians as a supreme tragedy.
Because it was out of bounds.
Basically, the desert was the realm of chaos, the realm of the god Set. The Nile was the realm of order and life.
Got it.
So being buried in the desert meant jeopardizing the soul's survival in the underworld. For an Egyptian, leaving the physical borders of Egypt was the worst possible fate you could imagine.
Okay, let me try to put this into a modern context so we can grasp just how shocking Joseph's final request really was.
Please do.
Imagine a modern-day billionaire, someone who has built a global empire, or perhaps a beloved head of state who has guided a nation through a massive crisis.
Someone universally respected.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, absolutely. This person reaches the end of their life, and the government comes to them and says, "We want to give you a massive state funeral.
We want to honor you.
We want to build a national monument in your honor right in the center of the capital city. Something that will cement your legacy for 1,000 years. We will spare no expense."
A total blank check.
Right. And this billionaire looks at them and says, "No, thank you. I refuse your state funeral. I refuse your monument.
Just turns it all down.
When I die, just put my body in a temporary storage container, leave it unburied, and wait for my distant relatives to come pick it up and take it to a different country."
It's unthinkable.
It is an absolute rejection of everything the culture values. It is a massive slap in the face to the entire Egyptian religious system.
That is a highly accurate parallel. I mean, Joseph submitted to the physical, biological necessity of embalming.
Well, he had to, right?
Yeah, which was unavoidable given his political office and state protocols. The Egyptians were going to embalm him whether he liked it or not.
He was the second in command of the empire, after all.
Right, but theologically, he completely subverted the pagan infrastructure. By demanding that his bones be carried out of Egypt, he categorically rejected the territorial spiritualism of the Egyptian empire.
He's saying, your gods have no claim on me.
Spot on. He recognized the Goshen, despite its immense agricultural abundance and the safety it provided during the famine, was a place of temporary exile.
It wasn't home.
No. He refused to let a pagan empire have the final say over his physical remains.
That takes a lot of guts.
It does. He was drawing a distinct line, showing that his true citizenship was not in the courts of Pharaoh, but in the land of Canaan.
The dirt promised to his fathers.
Yes.
I want to turn to you, the listener, and ask you to think about your own context for a second. Consider your own Egypt.
That's a good way to frame it.
Where are the places in your life where you experience comfort, success, and common grace?
We all have them.
We all have those spaces where things are going well, where we feel secure, well-fed, and celebrated.
Places where it's easy to just settle down.
Yeah. The tension we see in Joseph's life is the tension of receiving earthly mercies without making that temporary place a final home.
That's a very difficult balance to strike.
It is. Joseph was thankful for Egypt. He governed Egypt well. He saved millions of lives there. But he never let Egypt capture his soul.
He maintained an absolute theological distinctiveness, and that distinctiveness becomes crystal clear when we look at the specific grammar of his dying words.
No, the grammar here is fascinating.
It is. The text tells us that Joseph gathers his brothers, and he makes a stark, uncompromising declaration to them from his deathbed.
Right, let me read his exact final words to his brothers from the text. He says, "I am about to die, but God will surely visit you."
Such a short phrase.
It is such a brief sentence. On the surface, it sounds like a simple well wish, like, hey, God bless you guys.
Good luck out there.
Yeah. But the scholars writing these commentaries indicate there's a massive amount of theological weight resting on those specific words.
The weight is found in the Hebrew emphatic construction used in that phrase.
Break that down for us.
Sure. The Hebrew phrase is pakid yifkud otkam. This is a combination of an infinitive absolute with an imperfect verb.
Okay, that sounds like a mouthful.
I know, to translate that out of linguistic terminology, in English, if we want to add certainty to a statement, we might raise our voice.
Or we might add an exclamation point.
Right, or use an adverb like definitely. But in ancient Hebrew, the way you make a statement absolutely unbreakably certain is by repeating the verb twice.
So he's literally saying it double.
Yeah. A more rigid, literal translation of what Joseph says would be, visiting, he will visit, or he will most assuredly take note of you.
It's the linguistic equivalent of carving a promise into solid rock.
Absolutely. The root verb here is pqod, and across the Old Testament canon, this specific verb denotes a sovereign intervention.
A divine stepping in.
Yes. It describes a moment where God himself steps directly into human history to either execute judgment or, in this case, to perform a rescue.
So it's not a passive observation.
Not at all. Joseph intentionally uses this very strong verb rather than a weaker, more common alternative like to return or to come.
So the grammar itself leaves no room for doubt. It is not a wish. It is a guarantee.
A total guarantee.
Now, the commentaries we are analyzing use this specific grammatical construction to launch into a strict theological critique, and I want to break down what they are arguing.
This is a major point in the sources.
It is. The authors of our sources use this emphatic Hebrew phrasing to argue against a concept called Arminian conditional theology.
Right.
For anyone unfamiliar with that term, conditional theology essentially argues that God's promises rely heavily on humans making the right choices.
Or maintaining enough faith.
Yeah, or cooperating with God's plan. According to the scholars writing these source texts, this Hebrew grammar completely refutes that idea.
They are very adamant about this.
They assert that this verse proves God's visitation is unilateral. The authors argue that the fulfillment of the rescue is guaranteed entirely by God's character and his sovereign decree.
And it is in no way dependent upon human free will.
Or human cooperation, or Israel's good behavior in Egypt.
Which, spoiler alert, wasn't great.
Right. We are just laying out the case the commentators make here, showing how heavily they rely on the mechanics of the Hebrew language to argue that this rescue was a one-way, unstoppable guarantee.
The commentators take a very firm stance on that issue. They argue that Joseph's confidence rests entirely on the objective historic revelation given to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
It's built on the past.
Yeah. The authors insist there is no room for human variables in the execution of this promise. Because the verb is doubled pakad yifkad, the action is locked into reality by God alone.
So Joseph is not looking at his brothers and saying, if you guys behave well enough, God will rescue you.
No, he is saying God is coming regardless of what happens next.
Well, wait, I have to push back on this idea of absolute certainty, at least from the human perspective.
Okay, let's hear it.
If God's action is so completely guaranteed, if this sovereign visitation is an unbreakable decree, why the massive delay?
The timeline.
Let us look at the timeline. God told Abraham his descendants would be afflicted for 400 years.
4 centuries.
4 centuries. We are talking about multiple generations of people living and dying in brutal slavery.
Being whipped by Egyptian taskmaster.
Having their children thrown into the Nile River. Citing a theological decree does not automatically comfort a slave whose back is bleeding.
No, it certainly doesn't.
It is incredibly easy for human beings to look at a delay of 400 years and conclude that the promise has failed completely. We constantly confuse delay with denial.
We do that all the time today, too.
I mean, we do. So if God is so sovereign and the grammar is so guaranteed, why make them wait in agony for centuries?
That is the central psychological and theological crisis for the Israelites. The commentaries address this exact tension by contrasting human frailty with divine sovereignty.
How do they reconcile it?
To explain this vast gap in time, the authors of our sources cite Chapter 5, Paragraph 1 of the Westminster Confession of Faith.
Okay, going to the confession.
Yes. That specific paragraph outlines the concept of providence, stating that the Almighty God upholds, directs, disposes, and governs all creatures, actions, and things.
From the greatest, even to the least.
Right, by his wise and holy providence. The argument the authors make is that the death of human leaders, even a leader as towering and successful as Joseph, never interrupts the faithfulness of God.
So you are saying the passing of generations is actually factored into the sovereign plan, not an interruption of it.
Yes. The delay is not evidence of God's absence. Rather, the delay is a calculated phase in the progressive manifestation of his design.
That's a tough pill to swallow for the people in the middle of it.
It is. But Joseph's deathbed statement, I am dying, but God will visit, functions as a massive theological wedge.
A wedge.
Yeah, it separates the survival of the covenant from the survival of its human representatives. The leaders pass away, the empires change, the pharaohs rise and fall.
The centuries roll on.
Yeah, but the decree remains active and unaffected by the mortality of the people involved. The commentators argue that God frequently uses the crucible of waiting to strip away all human reliance.
So that when it finally happens, there's no doubt who did it.
Spot on, so that when the deliverance finally comes, it is visibly the result of divine intervention, not human engineering.
Okay, so Joseph guarantees this sovereign rescue verbally, but words fade over 400 years.
They do. People forget.
He knew his descendants would need a physical anchor for that promise, and that leads us to the specific box he chose.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Right. The text moves from Joseph's verbal prophecy to the physical object he leaves behind.
The box itself.
The discussion in our sources shifts to the highly specific type of coffin Joseph demanded. Again, it all comes down to the Hebrew word choice.
The linguistic details here are just stunning. The text states that Joseph was put in a coffin in Egypt. The Hebrew word used for this specific coffin is ashore. Now, to grasp why that matters, we have to look at the alternatives available to the writer.
Because there were other words they could have used.
Many. The standard Hebrew word for a stationary, permanent grave is kuber.
And Joseph explicitly refuses a quiber.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Furthermore, if we look at Greco-Roman secular literature, when they describe highly decorated funeral containers or sarcophagi, the Septuagint uses the Greek noun souro.
So a fancy stationary container.
Yeah. But the author of Genesis avoids those words entirely and uses a kuron.
Why is a huron so significant?
Because within the Hebrew canonical context, the noun Aaron is used almost exclusively later in the Bible to designate the Ark of the Covenant.
Oh, wow. So it's the exact same word.
Exact same word.
Let's paint a vivid picture of what this looks like for the Israelites centuries later.
Let's do it.
Imagine the vast Israelite wilderness march. You have millions of people moving through the barren desert, surrounded by scorching sand and hostile territory.
It is chaotic, it is loud, people are exhausted.
And right in the middle of this massive migration, they are carrying two distinct wooden boxes.
Side by side.
On one hand, you have the Ark of the Covenant, the golden box containing the stone tablets of the spoken law.
That Aaron.
And right alongside it, you have Joseph's Aaron, a simple wooden coffin containing his skeletal remains.
It's just an incredible visual.
Both of these boxes are physical, tangible guarantees of divine promises. One holds the law of God, and the other holds the bones of a man who bet his entire existence on the promise of God.
The visual of those two boxes moving together through the desert is one of the most striking images in biblical history.
It really gives you chills.
It does. Both boxes prove that the current desert march was not an aimless wandering, but the execution of an ancient, infallible plan.
They were marching towards a specific goal.
Yes. The law dictated how they were to live as God's people, and the bones proved that God keeps his geographical promises over centuries. They functioned as twin anchors for a displaced people.
Now, the scholars writing our sources also draw some very sharp cultural and religious critiques from this specific detail about the bones.
They certainly do.
Again, we want to impartially report the stances taken by the authors of these commentaries. We aren't taking a side here.
Just delivering the analysis from the text.
Right. First, the sources argue that this text functions as a strict polemic against Roman Catholic relic veneration.
That's a major theme for them.
The authors assert that Joseph's bones were preserved strictly as legal and geographic markers. They were essentially a physical title deed to Israel's inheritance of Canaan.
Like a proof of purchase.
Yeah. The sources want to make sure the reader understands the difference between keeping a physical object as a legal claim to land versus keeping a saint's bone because you think touching it will cure a disease.
The authors argued these bones were not preserved as magical items for superstitious worship or physical healing.
They were purely administrative.
That is a primary argument in the commentaries. The commentators view the bones as forensic evidence of a real estate transaction made between God and Abraham.
Not as objects possessing intrinsic spiritual power.
Right. The bones were an administrative reality, pointing to a geographical reality.
Additionally, the authors use this text to issue a firm rebuke against the modern prosperity gospel.
Another big topic.
Let's break that down. The prosperity gospel generally teaches that God's primary will for believers is financial blessing and physical health in this present life.
That if you're faithful, you'll be wealthy.
Yeah. And the commentators point out the immense irony here. Joseph held massive, incalculable earthly wealth in Egypt.
He was loaded.
He had chariots, palaces, gold chains, fine linen, and unlimited resources. Yet he viewed all that Egyptian prosperity as essentially meaningless compared to the divine decree concerning the dirt of Canaan.
He didn't care about the gold.
No. The authors are very clear in their position that true prosperity is found only in the geographic and theological domain established by God's promise.
Joseph's refusal to be buried in an Egyptian tomb is presented by the commentators as a total rejection of the idea that earthly wealth equals final divine favor.
Because if it did, he would have stayed in the tomb.
Yeah, if earthly wealth was the goal, Joseph would have accepted the Egyptian monument.
He would have taken the state funeral.
Absolutely. By choosing an unburied wooden box, he declares that all the gold in Egypt is worthless compared to the covenant promises of God.
So the commentators use this to argue that modern believers should similarly hold their material wealth with a loose grip.
It's all temporary anyway.
Now, let's look at the people Joseph was speaking to in the room. the original audience and how this functions across generations.
Because he wasn't just talking to the heir.
Right. The text brings up a very specific family detail in verse 23. It says, Joseph saw the children of Machir, the son of Manasseh, born upon his knees.
That's a very specific phrase.
It is.
That phrase, born upon his knees, is a recognized ancient Near Eastern gesture of adoption and blessing.
Oh, so it's a formal thing.
Yes. It is not just a grandfather playing with his grandkids. It signifies the formal familial reception and continuity of the covenant line.
He's making it official.
Joseph is looking at his great-grandchildren, and he is officially acknowledging that the promised seed is surviving and multiplying despite the immense pressures of living in a foreign empire.
He is claiming them for the covenant line.
He's saying, you belong to the promise.
So he sees the family growing, and then he does something very intense. He binds his brothers and his descendants with a severe, unbreakable oath to carry his bones out of the country when God finally rescues them.
An oath that lasted centuries.
Now, I have to ask, isn't it incredibly morbid to use your own skeleton to teach your kids a theological lesson?
It does sound a bit creepy to us today.
I mean, leaving your unburied corpse in the living room for centuries seems like a highly traumatic way to make a point.
Just a little bit.
Imagine going to your relative's house for dinner, and there was a wooden box with a skeleton inside just sitting in the corner of the room.
Oh, it is incredibly morbid by today's sensibilities. The modern mind recoils at that kind of proximity to death.
We hide it away as fast as we can.
We do. But within the context of ancient Israel, the commentators unpack this as a masterful act of what they call generational discipleship.
Generational discipleship. Okay.
We have to remember the audience. Moses wrote this account for the wilderness generation.
The people out in the desert.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that generation was notoriously prone to nostalgia.
Oh, they complained constantly.
Whenever things got difficult in the desert, whenever they were thirsty or tired, they would start crying out for the food and security they had back in Egypt.
We miss the leeks and the onions.
Yeah. They completely forgot the brutal reality of slavery because they missed the garlic and the onions.
It's selective memory.
Joseph anticipated that psychological pull. He knew the seduction of Egyptian comfort. So his unburied bones functioned as a ticking clock.
A physical reminder.
A relentless physical protest sign against assimilation. Every time an Israelite walked past that box for 400 years, it preached a silent sermon.
What was it saying?
It was saying, do not get comfortable here. This is not your home. Do not intermarry. Do not adopt their gods. Do not settle down.
Our sources actually bring in some modern sociological critiques to parallel this ancient problem of assimilation.
They have some striking numbers on this.
They do. The commentators cite a specific statistic, noting that 60% of professing Christians in Western nations prioritize career security and material wealth over local church commitment.
60%.
Yeah. They structure their lives around their jobs, their children's sports schedules, and their financial portfolios, treating their theological commitments as secondary optional activities.
Yes, the authors view that 60% statistic as the exact modern equivalent of assimilation to Egypt.
Just blending right in.
The commentary argues that when believers prioritize secular advancement over covenant obligations, they are repeating the exact error the wilderness generation constantly fell into.
They're choosing the leeks and onions of the empire over the promises of God.
It's the same trap, just a different era.
The sources also neutrally report another strong assertion from the authors regarding household structure.
Which is an interesting angle to take from this passage.
It is. The commentators argue that this passage demands the upholding of a complementarian order.
Let's define that.
To clarify for the listener, complementarianism is the theological view that men and women have distinct complementary roles.
Right.
Particularly that men are called to headship and leadership within the family and the church.
Yes. And the commentators assert that just as Joseph exercised headship to secure his family's theological future through his covenantal authority.
Making them swear the oath.
Yeah. They argue men today are called to lead their households with the same sacrificial theological depth, actively refusing to yield their families to secular pressures.
It all comes back to the question of legacy and what we are passing down to the next generation.
What are we leaving in the living room, so to speak?
Yeah. I want to turn back to you, the listener, and ask a really difficult question based on this text.
This is a tough one.
Are we domesticating our hope? When we look at the next generation, do we dream more about our children's careers than their souls?
Ouch.
I mean, Joseph had every single resource available to ensure his descendants would be the most powerful politicians in Egypt for centuries.
He could have set them up forever.
He could have established a permanent dynasty, but his dying focus was entirely on making sure they knew the theological promises given to Abraham.
He threw away political advantage for theological fidelity.
He refused to leave them an earthly inheritance that would tether them to a pagan empire.
He left them a solemn oath and a box of bones to ensure their eyes remained fixed on the horizon of God's redemption.
He essentially weaponized his own death to keep his family looking forward.
That's a brilliant way to put it.
So what does this all mean? How does this connect to the bigger picture? How does this ancient box of bones point forward to the rest of the biblical narrative?
The commentators spend a significant amount of time tracing the historical type of Joseph to the person of Jesus Christ.
The parallels are pretty clear once you start looking.
They are extensive and deliberate. Both Joseph and Christ were deeply loved by their fathers.
Right.
Both were violently rejected by their brothers out of jealousy.
Betrayed by their own blood.
Yeah. Both were humbled and suffered unjustly among Gentiles. Both were eventually elevated to the absolute right hand of supreme authority.
Joseph to Pharaoh and Christ to the Father.
Spot on. And most remarkably, both became the sole instruments of salvation for the very people who had betrayed and wronged them.
They saved their enemies.
Joseph saves his brothers from famine. Christ saves his people from sin.
The structural contrast between the ending of the book of Genesis and the climax of the gospel accounts is brilliant.
It's like perfect bookends.
Genesis ends with a highly publicized occupied coffin,
The bones are still there.
but the gospel ends with a highly publicized empty tomb.
The bones are gone.
Joseph could look at his brothers and announce that a visitation was coming in the future. He could point to the horizon.
God will visit you.
But Christ is the visitation itself.
Yes.
The incarnation is God stepping directly into the physical world, taking on human flesh, and executing the rescue mission personally.
That is the crucial distinction the authors draw. Joseph's bones testify that God will visit.
Pointing forward.
But Christ's empty tomb declares that God has visited and has permanently conquered the grave.
Finish.
Joseph's body was waiting for a future localized deliverance in Canaan, but Christ is the first fruits of the ultimate resurrection, inaugurating a global deliverance.
As we wrap up this theological synthesis, we also need to report the author's stance on eschatology,
The end times.
specifically regarding a framework called dispensationalism. For context, dispensationalism is a theological system that, among other things, maintains a sharp distinction between national Israel and the Christian church.
Right, particularly concerning promises made about the physical land,
The dirt itself.
the dirt. The commentaries insist that the incredibly physical nature of Joseph's request reinforces a dispensational framework.
How so?
The authors argue that God's covenant deals with literal, distinct geopolitical promises regarding the specific physical dirt of Canaan.
So it's not just a metaphor for heaven.
According to them, no. They assert that these ethnic and geographical promises made to national Israel are never structurally erased, spiritualized away, or entirely absorbed by the New Testament church.
They argue the land still matters.
Yes. However, the authors also acknowledge that the ultimate realization of all these physical promises finds its final, glorious consummation in the new heavens and the new earth.
Well, we have covered massive amounts of ground today.
A huge amount.
We started by looking at the Egyptian death cults, the obsession with the Nile, and the sheer theological defiance of Joseph rejecting a permanent monument.
The billionaire turning down the state funeral.
Right. We analyzed the specific grammar of sovereign grace, unpacking how that emphatic Hebrew phrase guarantees divine rescue regardless of human failure.
Pakad yifkad.
We visualized the two wooden boxes moving through the scorching wilderness, representing the law and the promise.
Such a powerful image.
And finally, we saw how that ancient coffin points directly to the empty tomb of Christ.
The occupied box versus the empty tomb.
Before we sign off, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final, unexamined idea to ponder.
Something to chew on.
Consider the sheer, unavoidable physicality of Joseph's request. In our modern context, faith is so often treated as a purely mental or spiritual exercise.
It's all in our heads.
We tend to think of religion as something that happens entirely inside our brains, or in an invisible, ethereal realm.
Like it doesn't touch the real world.
But God's promises involve actual dirt, literal bones, specific geography, and physical bodies.
Real things.
This physical coffin whispers a massive implication about God's intent to redeem not just our invisible souls, with the tangible physical material of the universe itself.
That's incredible to think about.
The God who created the physical garden at the beginning of Genesis is the same God who cares about a physical wooden box at the end of it. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking questions, keep thinking critically about the text, and we will catch you next time.